I'm Zoe Blackwood, 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago I buried my husband of 8 years after what I thought was a tragic mountain climbing accident. The ranger called to tell me Trevor had fallen from Eagle's Peak, his body recovered, his climbing gear scattered across the rocks below. But yesterday, when I finally worked up the courage to call Mountain Peak Guides to thank them for their efforts, the owner's words stopped my heart cold. "Ma'am, your husband never showed up for his scheduled climb. We waited 2 hours and marked him as a no-show." If Trevor wasn't climbing that mountain, then where was he for those 3 days? And if he wasn't with the guide service, how did he end up dead on that peak? The insurance payout sitting in my account suddenly feels like blood money, and I'm starting to realize that everything I thought I knew about my husband's death and maybe our entire marriage was a lie. Like and subscribe if you've ever discovered that the person you trusted most was living a double life. 3 weeks before that devastating phone call, I thought I knew exactly who my husband was. Trevor Blackwood, 34, an ambitious business consultant with calloused hands from weekend rock climbing adventures. We'd built what everyone called the perfect marriage, a beautiful colonial house in Maplewood Heights, 2 successful careers, and plans for children that we'd been discussing more seriously lately. Trevor's passion for mountain climbing had emerged 3 years ago, seemingly out of nowhere. One day he announced he wanted to try rock climbing at the local gym, and within months he was planning weekend trips to tackle increasingly challenging peaks. I supported his new hobby despite my constant worry, understanding that everyone needs something that makes them feel alive. He'd returned from these adventures glowing with accomplishment, regaling me with stories of breathtaking views and personal victories over fear. The morning he left for what would be his final climb, everything seemed perfectly normal. He kissed me goodbye at 6 a.m., his gear bag packed and ready by the door. 3 days at Eagle's Peak, he'd said, stroking my hair. "I'll call you when I reach the summit." I made him promise to be careful, as I always did, and he laughed that warm laugh I'd fallen in love with 8 years earlier. "You worry too much, Zoe," he'd said, using the nickname that always made me melt. "I'll be back Sunday night with stories that'll make you proud." But now, sitting in our living room 3 weeks later, staring at the business card for Mountain Peak Guides that I'd found in Trevor's gear bag, everything felt wrong. The leather-bound climbing journal I discovered told a different story than the one I thought I knew. Page after page of meticulous planning, detailed route maps, weather assessments, equipment checklists, but the final entry didn't match his supposed destination at all. The last page showed plans for Pikes Canyon, not Eagle's Peak. Different elevation, different difficulty level, different everything. His handwriting was hurried, almost frantic, with notes scrawled in the margins about changing plans and new timeline. Most disturbing of all was a phone number written in red ink, with the words "emergency contact" beside it, a number I didn't recognize. I'd called that number twice since finding it, but it went straight to voicemail with no personalized message. Just a generic robotic voice asking me to leave a message. Each time I hung up without speaking, my hands trembling as questions multiplied. In my mind, Trevor had been meticulous about his climbing plans. He researched everything, planned for contingencies, never deviated from his chosen route without extensive preparation. The discrepancy between his journal and where his body was found felt like finding a love letter in his pocket written to someone else. But what I discovered next would change everything. The insurance company's efficiency had been unsettling from the beginning. Within 5 days of Trevor's death certificate being filed, I received a call from Pinnacle Life Insurance informing me that my claim had been approved and processed. $2 million would be deposited into my account within 48 hours. $2 million. The number felt obscene sitting in my checking account, larger than any sum Trevor and I had ever discussed. We'd talked about life insurance in general terms when we bought the house, something about protecting each other if anything happened, but I'd never paid attention to the specifics. Money conversations had always been Trevor's domain. He handled our investments, our retirement planning, our financial future. Now, staring at the bank balance on my laptop screen, I felt sick to my stomach. This money represented Trevor's life, reduced to a number that would supposedly make everything easier. But nothing about this felt easy. I remembered Trevor mentioning something about updating our coverage about 6 months ago. It had been a casual comment over dinner, something About how his business was growing and we should protect ourselves better. I'd nodded absently while scrolling through my phone, trusting him to handle the details as he always did. How naive that seemed now. The insurance documents sat in a manila folder on my kitchen table, pages of legal language I'd been avoiding since they arrived. Today, finally, I forced myself to read through them. The policy had been increased from $500,000 to $2 million just 6 months before Trevor's death. The premium increases had been automatically deducted from our joint account amounts I'd never noticed among our other monthly expenses. What struck me as odd was the timing. Trevor had signed the increased paperwork in March, right around the time he'd started taking longer climbing trips. Trips that had become more frequent and more secretive. I'd attributed his growing passion for the sport to midlife restlessness, but now I wondered if there had been more to it. The beneficiary section listed only my name, which should have been comforting but somehow felt wrong. Trevor had always been thoughtful about including his younger brother in important decisions, yet there was no mention of family contingencies or secondary beneficiaries. Every instinct screamed at me not to touch this money. It felt like blood money, tainted by the growing suspicion that Trevor's death wasn't the straightforward accident I'd been told. The insurance company's rapid approval now seemed less like efficiency and more like eager complicity in something I didn't yet understand. I closed the laptop and pushed the documents away, but the questions wouldn't stop coming. Why had Trevor increased our coverage so dramatically? Why hadn't he discussed such a significant financial decision with me in detail? And most troubling of all, had he somehow known he was going to die? That's when I decided to retrace his final 3 days. Investigating your dead husband's final days feels like archaeological work, carefully brushing away layers of assumptions to uncover artifacts of truth buried beneath. I started with the most concrete evidence I could find, his credit card statements and bank records. Trevor had always been organized about finances, keeping meticulous records in a filing system that now felt like a roadmap to his secret life. I spread the last month's statements across our dining room table, looking for patterns I'd missed while drowning in grief. The first discrepancy jumped out immediately. On Thursday, the day before his supposed departure for Eagles Peak, Trevor's credit card showed a charge at Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. $58 for dinner, but I'd been home that night, eating leftover Chinese food alone while working late on a client presentation. When I'd asked where he'd been, he'd said he'd grabbed a quick burger after a late meeting. The lies were starting to add up. Friday morning showed a gas station charge, but not from any station on the route to Eagles Peak. Instead, it was from a Shell station on Highway 15, heading east toward the coast, completely opposite direction from where he claimed to be going. The timestamp showed 7:23 a.m., just over an hour after he'd kissed me goodbye. I called his office, dreading what I might discover. His assistant, cheerful and helpful as always, confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. Oh yes, Mrs. Blackwood, Trevor had taken personal days Thursday and Friday. He mentioned needing a long weekend for some family matters. We were so shocked to hear about the accident. Family matters. We had no family events planned. No emergencies. No obligations that would require personal days during what was supposed to be a climbing trip. The credit card trail continued to tell its disturbing story. Friday lunch at Café Luna, a romantic bistro known for its intimate atmosphere and couples dining. Saturday morning showed charges at an expensive hotel gift shop, followed by room service orders that were far too elaborate for someone supposedly camping alone on a mountain. Sunday's charges were the most damning. Brunch at the Grand Vista Hotel's restaurant, known for its champagne brunches and weekend romantic packages. The timing placed him there just hours before his supposed fall from Eagles Peak, a physical impossibility given the distance and terrain. My hands shook as I traced the pattern of deception. Every charge painted a picture of a romantic getaway, a carefully planned weekend with someone who wasn't his wife. The climbing trip had been a cover story, an elaborate lie to explain his absence while he enjoyed what appeared to be a lover's retreat. But with whom? And how did a romantic weekend end with Trevor dead on a mountain he was never supposed to climb? The hotel receipt I found next would shatter everything I believed about my marriage. The Grand Vista Hotel receipt was tucked into the inner pocket of Trevor's favorite hiking jacket, the one I'd been avoiding touching since the funeral home returned his personal effects. When I finally worked up the courage to go through his clothes, my fingers found the folded paper almost by accident. 3 nights. Friday through Sunday. The presidential suite, $4.50 per night, plus taxes and fees. Room service charges that could have fed us for a week. But most devastating of all were the additional charges that made my stomach drop: double occupancy rates, spa treatments for 2, champagne service for a romantic weekend package. Trevor hadn't been alone. The Grand Vista Hotel sat 40 minutes from our house in the opposite direction from Eagles Peak, a luxury resort known for anniversary celebrations and weekend escapes. I'd driven past it countless times, occasionally mentioning to Trevor that it might be nice for a special occasion. He'd always dismissed it as overpriced and pretentious. Apparently, it was perfect for someone else. I called the hotel that afternoon, my voice carefully controlled as I explained I was Trevor's widow seeking information about his final weekend. The front desk manager, a woman named Patricia with a kind voice, agreed to meet with me the following day. The Grand Vista's lobby was everything I'd imagined: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and an atmosphere of understated elegance that made me feel underdressed in my simple black sweater and jeans. Patricia greeted me with genuine sympathy, leading me to a private office behind the reception area. "I remember your husband," she said gently, settling behind her desk. "Such a lovely couple. They seemed so happy together." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Couple?" Patricia's expression shifted to confusion, then concern. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood and his wife. They checked in Friday afternoon for the romantic weekend package." She was a beautiful woman, tall, brunette, very elegant. They were celebrating their anniversary, if I recall correctly. The room seemed to tilt around me. "Can you describe her more specifically?" "Of course. She was probably late 20s, early 30s. Professional looking, carried herself with confidence. She wore a red dress Friday night when they dined in our restaurant. Our staff remembered because she seemed so sophisticated and happy. They were very affectionate with each other." My vision blurred as Patricia continued, each detail feeling like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. "Do you happen to have security footage from that weekend?" Patricia hesitated, then nodded. "I think we can arrange that, given the circumstances. Let me check with our security department." 20 minutes later, I sat in a small security office watching grainy black and white footage of my husband checking into a luxury hotel with another woman. Trevor looked relaxed and happy, his arm around a brunette who moved with familiar ease beside him. She looked up at him with obvious adoration as they approached the front desk, and he kissed the top of her head with casual intimacy. 8 years of marriage, and I'd never seen him look at me the way he looked at her in that moment. But who was this woman, and did she know Trevor was married? The burner phone was hidden in Trevor's home office like a guilty secret, tucked behind his business files in the bottom drawer of his desk. I'd been methodically searching through his belongings, looking for any clue about the mysterious brunette. From the hotel, when my fingers brushed against the unfamiliar device. It was a basic smartphone, nothing like Trevor's usual preference for the latest technology. When I powered it on, my hands trembling with anticipation and dread, the screen revealed a treasure trove of deception that made the hotel receipt seem innocent by comparison. The contact list contained only one name, Kay. The message history between Trevor and Kay painted a picture of a passionate relationship that had been developing for months. I scrolled through conversations that grew increasingly intimate, increasingly serious, and increasingly painful to read. "Can't wait to see you this weekend. 3 days of just us, no interruptions." Trevor, sent the Thursday before his death. "I've been dreaming about our future together. Soon we won't have to hide anymore." Kay, sent that same evening. "The papers are almost ready. My lawyer says another few weeks and we can start fresh." Trevor, sent 2 weeks before his death. "Papers. Divorce papers." My chest tightened as I continued reading, each message revealing the depth of Trevor's betrayal. He'd been planning to leave me for months, carefully orchestrating our separation while I remained completely oblivious. The conversations revealed strategic discussions about asset division, about how to minimize what I would receive in the divorce, about hiding money in accounts I didn't know existed. But it was Kay's messages that truly shocked me. She wasn't just some naive woman caught up in an affair, she was actively encouraging Trevor to deceive me, pushing him to be more aggressive about protecting their financial future. You need to transfer more money before you file. She can't claim what she doesn't know about. K. Sent 3 weeks before Trevor's death. The life insurance increase was smart. At least we know we're protected if anything happens. K. Sent 1 week after Trevor had increased our policy. My blood ran cold. K knew about the insurance policy increase. She'd even encouraged it. Have you told her about the climbing trip yet? Remember, stick to the story we discussed. K. Sent the Wednesday before Trevor's final weekend. The climbing trip was planned deception, choreographed by both of them. I scrolled further back, finding months of conversations about their strategy for ending my marriage without me suspecting anything until it was too late. She's so trusting, she'll never see it coming. By the time she realizes what's happening, everything will be settled. Trevor, sent 6 months ago. The casual cruelty of that message made me physically ill. The man I'd loved and trusted had been plotting against me with his mistress, treating our marriage like a business transaction to be dissolved as profitably as possible. But the most recent messages, from the days leading up to Trevor's death, revealed something that changed everything. Someone's asking questions about the business accounts. We might need to accelerate our timeline. Trevor, sent 5 days before his death. Are you sure it's safe to go away this weekend? Maybe we should wait. K. Sent 2 days before his death. Don't worry. After this weekend, we handle the Zoe situation permanently, then start our new life. Trevor, sent the day before his death. But if Trevor was planning to divorce me, why did he end up dead on that mountain? Trevor's laptop sat on his desk like a digital tomb, password protected but not impossible to access. He'd always used variations of the same password, climbing-related terms combined with significant dates. After 3 attempts, Eagles Peak 2019 unlocked the device, revealing a browsing history that painted an even more disturbing picture of his final months. The search history read like a manual for financial deception and marital destruction. Page after page of research into divorce law, asset protection, and ways to minimize alimony payments. Trevor had been studying how to systematically dismantle our life together while maximizing his financial advantage. How to hide assets during divorce proceedings, offshore accounts, legal requirements, life insurance beneficiary laws, spousal rights, property title transfers before divorce filing. Each search term felt like a betrayal, evidence of calculated planning to leave me with as little as possible. But more disturbing were the specific attorney consultations he'd scheduled. 3 different divorce lawyers, all specializing in high asset protection and complex marital dissolution. The appointment confirmations were meticulous. He'd met with each lawyer separately, clearly shopping for someone who would help him implement the most aggressive strategy possible. One consultation summary, saved in his documents folder, outlined a plan that made my stomach turn. The strategy involved claiming financial hardship while secretly moving assets to accounts in his name only. He would argue that his business was failing, that we were struggling financially, all while hiding the truth about our actual wealth. The lawyer had even suggested that Trevor could claim I was financially irresponsible, using my lack of involvement in our financial planning against me. But what shocked me most was discovering that Trevor had already begun implementing this plan. Bank statements showed systematic transfers to accounts I'd never seen before, each movement of money carefully timed to look like normal business expenses or investment adjustments. Over the past 6 months, nearly $200,000 had been moved from our joint accounts into investment vehicles that listed only Trevor's name. Money I'd helped earn through my own career, money I'd assumed was building our shared future, had been quietly separated from anything I could claim in divorce proceedings. The email correspondence with his business partner revealed another layer of deception. They'd been restructuring their company specifically to shield Trevor's assets, creating complex ownership arrangements that would make his actual income nearly impossible to calculate during divorce proceedings. Phase 1 complete. Business restructuring. Will show minimal personal income starting next quarter. Email from business partner, sent 8 weeks before Trevor's death. Perfect. Kay thinks we should accelerate timeline. Want everything locked down before I file papers. Trevor's response. Kay was more than just the other woman, she was his strategic partner in dismantling my financial security. The emails revealed. She had business background, possibly accounting or legal experience, because her suggestions for hiding assets were sophisticated and detailed. But what chilled me most was finding Trevor's research into life insurance fraud and beneficiary manipulation. He'd been exploring whether death benefits could be contested, whether there were ways to ensure certain payouts while excluding others. The searches suggested he was planning something beyond divorce, something that would remove me from the picture entirely. Suspicious death insurance investigations, how long before life insurance pays out, beneficiary challenges legal grounds. The pattern was becoming clear. Trevor hadn't just been planning to leave me, he'd been planning to destroy me financially and possibly permanently. That's when I realized Trevor's death might not have been an accident at all. Mountain Peak Guides operated out of a rustic cabin 30 miles north of Eagles Peak, surrounded by the kind of wilderness that had supposedly claimed my husband's life. I drove there on a gray Thursday morning, armed with questions and a growing suspicion that nothing about Trevor's death was what it seemed. Jake Morrison, the owner and lead guide, was a weathered man in his 50s with the kind of deep tan and calloused hands that spoke of decades spent in the mountains. His office walls were covered with photographs of successful climbs, safety certifications, and testimonials from satisfied clients. This was clearly a legitimate operation run by people who took safety seriously. "Mrs. Blackwood," Jake said, settling behind his desk with genuine sympathy in his eyes. "I can't tell you how sorry we are about your husband. What happened was a tragedy, but I have to admit, we've been confused about the whole situation." "Confused how?" Jake pulled out a thick reservation book and flipped to the date of Trevor's supposed climb. "Your husband made a reservation for the Eagles Peak guided climb 6 weeks in advance. Paid the full deposit, received all our preparation materials, confirmed twice by phone. But then, the day before the scheduled climb, he called to cancel." My heart stopped. "He canceled?" "Yes, ma'am. Friday morning, around 8 a.m. Said he had a family emergency and needed to postpone. We offered to reschedule, but he said he'd call back when he was ready. We marked him as a cancellation and moved on." The timing aligned perfectly with the gas station receipt showing Trevor heading in the opposite direction from Eagles Peak. He'd cancelled his legitimate climbing trip to pursue his romantic weekend with Kay. "So you weren't surprised when he didn't show up Saturday morning?" "Not at all. He was marked as cancelled in our system. That's why we were so shocked when the Rangers called Sunday evening asking about our client who'd fallen from Eagles Peak. We told them the same thing I'm telling you. Trevor Blackwood never showed up for his scheduled climb." Jake stood and walked to a large topographical map mounted on his office wall. His finger traced the established climbing routes on Eagles Peak, then moved to a location marked with red ink. "This is where your husband's body was found," he said, pointing to an area that looked completely isolated from any established trail. "Mrs. Blackwood, in 30 years of guiding climbs on this mountain, I've never taken anyone to this location. It's not a climbing area, it's a remote section of wilderness that experienced climbers avoid because the rock is unstable. And the access is dangerous." The red mark on the map seemed to pulse with significance. What kind of person would end up there? Someone who was lost, someone who was running from something, or someone who was taken there by force. Jake's expression was grim. "The terrain where Trevor was found isn't somewhere you end up by accident. You'd have to deliberately hike several miles off any established trail, through dense forest and over treacherous terrain." He pulled out another map, this one showing the area in greater detail. "Look at this. To reach the location where Trevor was found from any normal access point, you'd have to cross 3 streams, navigate through nearly impassable brush, and climb over terrain that would challenge experienced hikers. And you'd need local knowledge to even find the area." Local knowledge? Someone who knew these mountains intimately. Someone who could navigate to that remote location in the dark, because based on the coroner's estimated time of death, Trevor was there late Sunday evening. The implications were staggering. Trevor hadn't been climbing when he died. He'd been taken to a remote location by someone who knew exactly where they were going, someone who wanted to ensure his body would be found eventually but not immediately. "Jake, in your professional opinion, could Trevor have ended up where he was found by accident?" The guide's expression was somber as he shook his head. "Mrs. Blackwood, I hate to say this, but your husband didn't die in a climbing accident. Someone else was involved in what happened to him. The coroner's report I requested next would confirm my worst fears. Dr. Patricia Chen, the county coroner, was a precise woman with kind eyes who treated her work with the gravity it deserved. Her office felt more like a medical facility than the stark, clinical space I'd expected, with diplomas covering the walls and family photos on her desk that reminded me she dealt with human tragedy every day. "Mrs. Blackwood, I've been hoping you'd contact me," Dr. Chen said as she gestured for me to sit across from her desk. "Your husband's case has been troubling me since I completed the autopsy. There are several inconsistencies that don't align with a typical climbing accident." She opened a thick file folder containing documents I wasn't sure I was ready to see. "Let me walk you through my findings, and please stop me if you need a moment." The first photograph showed Trevor's hands, and even to my untrained eye, something looked wrong. "These are defensive wounds," Dr. Chen explained, pointing to scratches and bruises across Trevor's knuckles and palms. "Someone who falls while climbing typically has injuries from trying to arrest their fall or protect their head. These injuries suggest Trevor was fighting someone off before he fell." My throat tightened. Fighting someone? The pattern of bruising on his forearms and hands is consistent with blocking punches or trying to defend himself from an attacker. "See these marks here?" She indicated dark bruises on his forearms. Classic defensive positioning when someone is trying to protect themselves. Dr. Chen turned to another section of the report. "More concerning is the blunt force trauma to the back of Trevor's head. This injury occurred before his fall, and it's not consistent with the injuries he sustained when he hit the rocks below." "What kind of blunt force trauma?" "Something heavy and rounded struck him from behind. The injury pattern suggests a rock or perhaps a heavy flashlight. The wound was significant enough to cause disorientation or unconsciousness, which would explain why he wasn't able to defend himself during the fall." The room felt like it was spinning around me. "You're saying someone hit him before he fell?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. The sequence of injuries tells a clear story. Trevor was struck from behind, fought with his attacker, then fell or was pushed from a significant height. This was not an accident." Dr. Chen opened another section of the file. The toxicology report raised additional concerns. "We found traces of rohypnol in Trevor's system." Rohypnol? It's commonly known as a date rape drug. It causes disorientation, memory loss, and muscle weakness. The levels we found suggest it was administered within hours of his death, probably slipped into a drink. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Trevor had been drugged, attacked, and murdered. Someone had planned his death carefully, using the remote location and his supposed climbing trip to cover their tracks. "Dr. Chen, why wasn't this classified as a homicide immediately?" Initially, the remote location and Trevor's known climbing hobby made accidental death seem plausible. But as I examined the evidence more carefully, the inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. "I've been preparing to recommend a formal investigation." She handed me a document marked "Amended Death Certificate, Pending Investigation." "I'm officially changing the cause of death from accidental to suspicious pending homicide investigation. The evidence clearly shows your husband was murdered, Mrs. Blackwood. Someone wanted Trevor dead and went to great lengths to make it look like an accident." The weight of that statement settled over me like a shroud. Someone had planned and executed Trevor's murder with enough sophistication to initially fool investigators. They'd chosen the perfect cover story, a climbing accident in a remote location, where evidence could be compromised by weather and wildlife. "Do you have any theories about who might have done this?" Dr. Chen's expression was carefully neutral. "That's not my area of expertise, but I can tell you this was planned by someone who knew Trevor's habits, knew the terrain, and had access to drugs and the physical capability to overpower him. This wasn't a random crime." As I left the coroner's office with copies of the amended report, one question burned in my mind. But who wanted Trevor dead, and why make it look like a climbing accident? Finding Kay's real identity took less detective work than I'd expected. The burner phone's call history revealed several calls to Pinnacle Business Solutions, the consulting firm where Trevor worked. A quick search of the company website revealed their staff directory, and there she was, Kylie Thorne, Senior Financial Analyst, with the same elegant features I'd seen in the hotel security footage. Her business card was professionally printed on expensive cardstock. Kylie Thorne, CPA. MBA, specializing in asset management and corporate restructuring. The credentials explained her sophisticated understanding of financial manipulation and divorce strategy. She wasn't just Trevor's mistress, she was his professional partner in deception. I waited in the parking lot of Pinnacle Business Solutions until lunchtime, watching through the glass doors as employees came and went. When Kylie emerged, looking polished and confident in a charcoal business suit, I approached her before I could lose my nerve. "Kylie Thorne?" She turned, and I saw recognition flash across her features before she could mask it. Up close, she was even more beautiful than the security footage had suggested, tall, impeccably groomed, with the kind of self-assured presence that commands attention in boardrooms. "I'm Zoe Blackwood. I think we need to talk." Kylie's composure cracked for just a moment before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." The Grand Vista Hotel. The burner phone. 3 months of text messages planning my husband's divorce strategy while you two played house on weekends. I kept my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "Should I continue, or would you prefer to have this conversation somewhere more private?" Kylie glanced around the busy parking lot, clearly calculating her options. "There's a coffee shop around the corner. 5 minutes." The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover for our conversation but quiet enough that we could speak freely. Kylie chose a corner table, her back to the wall like someone expecting trouble. Her hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. "How long?" I asked without preamble. "How long what?" "Don't play games with me, Kylie. How long were you and Trevor having an affair?" She stared into her coffee for a long moment before answering. 8 months. 8 months. While I'd been planning our future, supporting his climbing hobby, trusting him completely, he'd been building a new life with someone else. "Did you know he was married when it started?" "Yes." The admission was barely above a whisper. "Did you care?" Kylie's composure finally cracked completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked up at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. "At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Trevor said you two were having problems, that the marriage was over and everything but paperwork. He made it sound like you were just going through the motions. But you knew that wasn't true. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized he was lying. About you, about your relationship, about everything. Trevor was good at making people believe what he wanted them to believe." The pain in her voice seemed genuine, but I wasn't ready to feel sympathy for the woman who'd helped destroy my marriage. "You encouraged him to hide assets from me. I saw the text messages. That was his idea. Trevor said you wouldn't understand the complexity of his business, that it was better to handle the financial aspects quietly to avoid unnecessary conflict." Kylie wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I thought I was helping him protect both of you from a messy divorce. By stealing money I'd helped earn? I didn't think of it that way at the time." Trevor was persuasive. He made everything sound reasonable, like he was just being practical about an inevitable situation. I leaned forward, studying her face for signs of deception. "When did you last see him?" "The weekend he died. We spent 3 days at the Grand Vista Hotel." Fresh tears started flowing. "It was supposed to be our last secret weekend before he filed for divorce. He said after that, we could be open about our relationship." "And you believed him?" I wanted to believe him. Trevor promised we'd be married within a year, that we'd start fresh together. I was in love with the future he painted. Something in her expression made me pause. "You said was past tense." Kylie's face went pale. "He's dead, Zoe." "Of course it's past tense. When did you find out he was dead?" "Monday morning. It was on the news." I was devastated. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something that didn't match her words. "You seem more scared than devastated." "Wouldn't you be scared? The man I loved died in a horrible accident, and now his widow is confronting me about our affair." I pulled out my phone and showed her the amended death certificate Dr. Chen had given me. "Trevor didn't die in an accident, Kylie. He was murdered." The color drained completely from her face. "Murdered? Drugged, beaten, and thrown from a cliff." Someone wanted him dead and went to great lengths to cover it up. Kylie's hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold her coffee cup. Oh God, oh God, oh God. What aren't you telling me? I received threatening messages too. The words tumbled out in a rush. Starting the week before Trevor died. Anonymous texts telling me to stay away from him, that I was in danger if I didn't end the relationship. My blood ran cold. What kind of threats? Someone knew about our affair, knew about our plans. They said if I didn't disappear, I'd end up like Trevor. Kylie's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought they were just empty threats from someone who'd found out about us. But if Trevor was actually murdered, do you still have the messages? She nodded, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. I was too scared to delete them. As she scrolled through her message history, looking for the threats, I realized that Kylie wasn't just Trevor's accomplice in betraying me. She was another victim of whoever had killed my husband. And her next revelation would expose a web of lies I never saw coming. Kylie's revelation about Trevor's business partnership came between sobs and shaking hands as she showed me the threatening messages on her phone. But what she told me about his professional relationship painted a picture far darker than a simple affair. Trevor's business wasn't just failing, Kylie whispered, glancing around the coffee shop as if expecting to be overheard. His partner was stealing from the company, and Trevor had found out. The threatening messages on her phone were chilling: stay away from Trevor or join him, mind your own business or become our business, you've seen too much already. But it was what Kylie revealed about Trevor's work that made everything click into horrifying focus. What do you mean stealing from the company? Trevor discovered that his partner was embezzling client funds. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Moved through shell accounts, fake invoices for services never rendered, inflated expense reports that were pure fiction. Kylie's voice steadied as she focused on the facts. Trevor came to me because of my accounting background. He wanted someone to help him understand the complexity of what he'd found. Why didn't he go to the police? He was gathering evidence. First, Trevor said his partner was sophisticated about covering his tracks, that they'd need irrefutable proof before making accusations. Kylie pulled out a flash drive from her purse. He asked me to help him organize the financial evidence. Everything is on here: bank records, forged documents, email communications that prove the embezzlement. I stared at the small device that might contain the motive for Trevor's murder. How much money are we talking about? Over $2 million stolen over the past 3 years. Trevor's partner was systematically draining the business while making it look like normal operational expenses. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2 million, exactly the amount of Trevor's life insurance policy. The coincidence felt too significant to ignore. Kylie, I need to see their business partnership agreement. I have a copy. Trevor gave it to me when he was trying to understand his legal options. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to her photo gallery, showing me pictures of legal documents. This is what made everything so urgent for Trevor. The partnership agreement was a standard legal document until I reached the section about partner death benefits. The language was complex, but the meaning was clear: if either partner died, their shares of the business would transfer automatically to the surviving partner. No probate, no family involvement, no questions asked. Trevor's partner stood to gain complete control of a multimillion-dollar consulting firm if Trevor died. What's his partner's name? Garrett Hoffman. They've been partners for 6 years, built the business together from nothing. Kylie's expression darkened. But Trevor said Garrett had changed over the past year, becoming secretive and defensive about financial decisions. I remembered Trevor mentioning Garrett occasionally: business dinners, golf outings, the usual partner interactions. But Trevor had never brought him around the house, never included him in our social circle. Looking back, that seemed unusual. For such a close business relationship. Did Trevor confront Garrett about the embezzlement? Not directly. Trevor was building a case first, documenting everything before making accusations. But he said Garrett was getting suspicious, asking questions about Trevor's access to financial records. The timeline was becoming clear. Trevor discovers the embezzlement, begins gathering evidence, and suddenly ends up dead in a way that initially looks accidental. Meanwhile, Garrett gains control of the business and eliminates the only person who could expose his crimes. There's something else, Kylie said, her voice dropping even lower. The week before Trevor died, he told me Garrett had been asking strange questions about Trevor's climbing trips. Where he went, when he'd be back, whether anyone else knew his routes. Garrett was gathering information for the murder. It looks that way. Trevor thought Garrett was just being friendly, showing interest in his hobby. But now it seems like Garrett was planning something. I thought about the sophisticated nature of Trevor's murder, the drugging, the remote location, the staged climbing accident. It would require someone with detailed knowledge of Trevor's habits and climbing expertise to pull it off convincingly. Did Garrett know about Trevor's climbing? They'd talked about it extensively. Garrett even went on a few beginner climbs with Trevor early on, said he wanted to understand the appeal. Trevor mentioned that Garrett had surprised him with how quickly he learned the technical aspects. Everything was falling into place. Garrett had the motive, stealing millions and avoiding prison. He had the knowledge, understanding Trevor's climbing habits and the mountain terrain. And he had the means, access to drugs through business connections and the physical capability to overpower Trevor once he was incapacitated. Kylie, Trevor's murder wasn't about your affair or the divorce. This was about stopping him from exposing the embezzlement. She nodded, tears flowing freely again. I think Garrett killed Trevor to protect himself, and now he knows I have evidence of the financial crimes. We need to take this to the police immediately. But what if we're wrong? What if we're accusing an innocent man? I thought about Dr. Chen's autopsy report, the evidence of premeditated murder, the sophisticated planning required to pull off Trevor's death. We're not wrong. Garrett Hoffman killed my husband to cover up his crimes. But confronting a murderer would put my own life in danger. Building a murder case requires patience, precision, and the kind of methodical approach that Trevor would have appreciated. Over the next week, Kylie and I worked together to organize every piece of evidence that could connect Garrett Hoffman to both the embezzlement and Trevor's death. The financial evidence was overwhelming once properly organized. Kylie's accounting expertise helped translate the complex money movements into a clear narrative of systematic theft. Bank records showed Garrett creating shell companies with names similar to legitimate vendors, then billing Trevor's company for services that were never provided. Look at this pattern, Kylie explained, spreading printouts across my dining room table. Every month, Garrett would create invoices for consulting services or equipment rentals from companies that exist only on paper. The money would flow from their business account to these fake companies, then immediately transfer to Garrett's personal accounts. The sophistication was impressive and infuriating. Garrett had been stealing from Trevor for years, using his partner's trust and friendship as cover for systematic embezzlement. The total amount stolen exceeded $2.3 million, money that should have been Trevor's share of their successful business. But it was the communications evidence that provided the clearest motive for murder. Email chains between Garrett and various bank representatives showed him asking detailed questions about partner death benefits, business succession planning, and how quickly ownership transfers could be processed. This email is from 2 months before Trevor's death, I said, pointing to a particularly damning message. Garrett is asking their lawyer about hypothetical scenarios where a business partner dies unexpectedly. The lawyer's response outlined exactly how Garrett would gain complete control of the business if Trevor died, including specific timelines for asset transfers and client contract reassignments. It read like a how-to guide for benefiting from a partner's death. More disturbing were Garrett's Google search histories, which Kylie had accessed using Trevor's shared business computer. The searches revealed extensive research into climbing accidents, mountain rescue operations, and forensic investigation procedures for wilderness deaths. He was studying how to make Trevor's murder look accidental, Kylie said, her voice hollow with realization. Look at these searches. How long does Rohypnol stay in system? Eagles Peak climbing accident statistics, time between death and discovery in wilderness areas. The most crucial breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a trail camera. During my second visit to Eagles Peak with Jake Morrison, we discovered a wildlife monitoring camera positioned along one of the access routes to the area where Trevor's body was found. Trail cameras are motion activated, Jake explained as we retrieved the device. If anyone passed this way the night Trevor died, we'll have footage. The camera's memory card contained dozens of images from the weekend in question, mostly deer and other wildlife moving through the forest. But at 11:47 p.m. on the Sunday night Trevor died, the camera captured something that made my blood run cold. Two figures moving through the forest in the darkness, one supporting the other who appeared to be stumbling. The timestamp was less than 2 hours before the coroner estimated Trevor's time of death. Even in the grainy night vision footage, one figure was clearly larger and more stable, while the other moved with the unsteady gait of someone who was drugged or injured. "This is it," I whispered, staring at the images. "This is Trevor being taken to the location where he was murdered." Jake enhanced the images using software on his computer, and while we couldn't see faces clearly, we could make out distinctive clothing. The larger figure wore a dark jacket with reflective striping, the kind of outdoor gear that serious climbers used for night operations. "I remember Garrett buying a jacket like that," Kylie said when I showed her the footage. "He made a big deal about getting the same brand Trevor used, said he wanted to learn from the best." The evidence was compelling, but we needed more than circumstantial connections. That's when Kylie suggested something that terrified and excited me in equal measure. What if we could get him to confess? The plan we developed was risky but straightforward. Kylie would contact Garrett under the pretense of needing help with business matters following Trevor's death. She would wear a wire provided by the police, who were now officially investigating Trevor's death as a homicide based on our evidence. "You understand the dangers involved," Detective Martinez warned during our meeting at the police station. "If Garrett killed once to protect himself, he won't hesitate to kill again if he suspects he's being recorded." But I was past caring about personal safety. The man who had murdered my husband was walking free, probably thinking he'd committed the perfect crime. The life insurance money sitting in my account felt like blood money until justice was served. "We'll have surveillance teams positioned around the meeting location," Detective Martinez assured us. "At the first sign of danger, we move in." As we finalized the plans for the confrontation, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since finding that first hotel receipt. Trevor's murder had transformed me from a trusting wife into someone capable of seeking justice through dangerous means. But the business partner knew I was getting close to the truth. The anonymous note appeared under my windshield wiper 3 days after our meeting with Detective Martinez, folded neatly and secured with a small stone to prevent it from blowing away. The message was typed on plain white paper, the kind available at any office supply store. "Stop digging into matters that don't concern you. Trevor's death was an accident. Accept it and move on, or you'll discover that accidents can happen to anyone." My hands shook as I read the words, standing alone in the grocery store parking lot where I'd found the threatening message. Someone had been watching me, following my movements closely enough to know where I'd be and when. The realization that I was being stalked sent ice through my veins. But the threat also confirmed what I'd suspected. Garrett knew I was investigating Trevor's death, and he was scared enough to try intimidating me into stopping. The intimidation escalated over the following days. My home security system recorded someone testing doors and windows during the night, though the figure was careful to avoid the camera angles. Items in my house were subtly moved, books shifted on shelves, kitchen chairs pushed in at different angles, personal items relocated just enough to let me know someone had been inside. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and terrifying. Garrett wanted me to feel vulnerable and watched without providing evidence that would definitively prove harassment. He was playing mind games designed to make me question my own perceptions and abandon my investigation out of fear. "This is escalating quickly," Detective Martinez said when I reported the incidents. "We need to accelerate our timeline for the confrontation." But I was discovering reserves of courage I hadn't known I possessed. Trevor's murder had awakened something fierce and determined within me, transforming grief into a focused pursuit of justice that couldn't be intimidated into silence. "He's making mistakes by threatening me," I told Kylie during one of our planning sessions. "Every threatening gesture is evidence of his guilt and consciousness of wrongdoing." The breaking point came when I found my car's brake lines had been tampered with, not severed completely, but damaged enough to cause failure during hard braking. Only my mechanic's routine inspection prevented what could have been a fatal accident designed to look like automotive failure. This isn't intimidation anymore, Detective Martinez said grimly. This is attempted murder. We're moving forward with the confrontation tomorrow. That night, alone in my house with police surveillance positioned outside, I reflected on how much I'd changed since discovering Trevor's betrayal. The trusting, naive woman who'd believed her husband's lies about climbing trips had evolved into someone capable of setting a trap for a murderer. Trevor's affair had broken my heart, but his murder had forged me into something stronger. I was no longer someone who would passively accept others' versions of truth. I had become someone who would fight for justice, even when it meant putting myself in danger. The threatening note sat on my kitchen table, a reminder that tomorrow would determine whether Trevor's killer would face consequences or continue believing he'd committed the perfect crime. Garrett had underestimated the woman he was trying to intimidate. That's when I decided to set a trap for Trevor's killer. The wire recording device was smaller than I'd expected, barely larger than a button and designed to be virtually undetectable when properly positioned. Detective Martinez's technical team spent an hour ensuring the equipment was working perfectly and would capture clear audio even in challenging conditions. Remember, your goal is to get him talking about Trevor's death, Detective Martinez instructed as the technician made final adjustments to the recording equipment. Don't push too hard too fast. Let him reveal information naturally through conversation. Kylie would initiate contact with Garrett under the pretense of needing help settling Trevor's business affairs. As Trevor's business partner and the person who now controlled the company, Garrett would be expected to assist with financial matters and client transitions. It was a perfectly reasonable request that wouldn't raise immediate suspicions. The meeting location was chosen strategically, a public park with multiple access points for surveillance teams but secluded enough for private conversation. The picnic area beside Mill Creek provided natural cover for recording equipment while offering clear sight lines for the officers positioned throughout the park. I'll tell him I need help understanding Trevor's client relationships and outstanding projects, Kylie explained as we reviewed the plan one final time. That gives me a reason to ask detailed questions about Trevor's final days and his state of mind before the climbing trip. My role was to arrive 30 minutes into their conversation, ostensibly by coincidence while taking my daily walk through the park. The introduction would allow me to participate in discussions about Trevor's death while the recording captured Garrett's reactions to unexpected questions. The key is making him comfortable enough to talk freely, Detective Martinez emphasized. If he suspects he's being recorded, he'll shut down completely. As the surveillance teams took their positions around the park, I felt the familiar mixture of terror and determination that had become my constant companion since discovering Trevor's murder. This was our one chance to get evidence that could secure a conviction. If Garrett remained silent or became suspicious, he might never provide the confession we needed. Kylie arrived at the park first, choosing a picnic table that offered optimal audio recording while appearing natural for a business conversation. Through binoculars, I watched Garrett approach exactly on time, carrying a briefcase and looking like any other professional meeting with a colleague. Even from a distance, Garrett appeared confident and relaxed. He embraced Kylie in what seemed like genuine sympathy, his body language suggesting someone helping a friend through difficult circumstances rather than someone who had committed murder. The first 20 minutes of their conversation, relayed to me through my earpiece, covered routine business matters, client accounts, pending projects, financial transitions. Garrett sounded helpful and professional, expressing appropriate concern for Kylie's well-being while efficiently addressing her questions. But when Kylie began asking about Trevor's final week, Garrett's tone shifted subtly. Trevor seemed distracted those last few days, he said, his voice taking on a careful quality. I wondered if he was having problems at home. What kind of problems? Kylie asked. He mentioned financial pressures, said he was worried about long-term security. Trevor talked about making some significant changes in his life. It was my cue to enter the conversation. I approached their table with practiced casualness, pretending surprise at seeing Kylie in the park. Kylie? What a coincidence. How are you holding up? Garrett's expression tightened almost imperceptibly when he saw me, but he maintained his composure as Kylie introduced us. Garrett, this is Zoe, Trevor's widow. Zoe, Garrett was Trevor's business partner. I'm so sorry for your loss, Garrett said, extending his hand with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. Trevor was an exceptional partner and friend. His death was such a shock to all of us. Up close, Garrett was smaller than I'd expected, with the kind of soft features that suggested someone more comfortable in boardrooms than wilderness areas. But his handshake was firm, and his eyes held an intelligence that reminded me he'd successfully embezzled millions while maintaining his partner's trust. Thank you. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened. Trevor was such an experienced climber. That's what made his accident so surprising, Garrett replied smoothly. Trevor was always so careful about safety protocols. Were you aware of his climbing plans that weekend? Garrett hesitated for just a moment before answering. He mentioned Eagle's Peak, said it would be a challenging solo climb. I worried about him going alone, but Trevor was confident in his abilities. The lie rolled off his tongue effortlessly, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders as he spoke. This was the man who had murdered my husband, sitting across from me and expressing fake sympathy while lying about his involvement. It's strange, I said carefully. The guide service said Trevor never showed up for his scheduled climb. Garrett's face went pale, and for the first time, his composure cracked visibly. I'm sorry, what did you say? Garrett's confession unraveled with the desperate speed of someone who realized his carefully constructed lies were collapsing around him. The moment I mentioned the guide service, his face drained of color and his professional composure shattered completely. The guide service, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Mountain Peak Guides. They said Trevor never showed up for his scheduled climb. He'd actually canceled the day before. I kept my voice steady, watching as panic flickered behind his eyes. Where do you think Trevor was that weekend, Garrett? I don't know. Maybe he changed his mind about climbing alone. But his hands were shaking now, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. Kylie leaned forward, her expression carefully concerned. Garrett, you seem upset. Is there something about Trevor's death that you haven't told us? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Through my earpiece, I could hear Detective Martinez's voice. He's breaking. Keep the pressure steady. I've been wondering about something, I continued. Trevor discovered some financial irregularities in your partnership, didn't he? Garrett's eyes went wide. What are you talking about? The embezzlement. $2.3 million moved through shell companies over 3 years. Trevor found out, and you killed him to keep him quiet. That's insane. You're grief-stricken and looking for someone to blame. We have the evidence, Kylie interrupted, her voice stronger now. Bank records, forged invoices, email communications. Trevor documented everything before he died. Garrett stood abruptly, knocking over his coffee cup. This conversation is over. You're both delusional. Sit down, Garrett. My voice carried an authority I didn't know I possessed. The police are already investigating. Running away now just makes you look more guilty. Police? The word came out strangled. Trevor's death has been reclassified as a homicide. The coroner found evidence that he was drugged and beaten before he fell. I pulled out my phone and showed him the amended death certificate. Someone murdered my husband, and we have trail camera footage of 2 people moving through the forest the night he died. Garrett sank back into his seat, his face ashen. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The confession was starting. Through my earpiece, I heard Detective Martinez say, "We've got him. Keep him talking." How was it supposed to happen, Garrett? Trevor was going to destroy everything. 20 years of building this business, and he was going to throw it all away over some accounting discrepancies. Garrett's voice took on a desperate, justifying tone. I borrowed money from client accounts. I was going to pay it back. $2 million isn't borrowing, it's stealing. Trevor didn't understand the pressure I was under. Personal debts, family obligations. I needed time to fix things, but he threatened to call the police immediately. Kylie leaned closer. So you decided to kill him? I tried to reason with him first. That weekend, I suggested we meet to discuss a solution. I told Trevor I'd found a way to repay everything if he'd give me 6 months. Garrett's hands were visibly trembling now. But he wouldn't listen. He said I'd betrayed our partnership, that he couldn't trust me anymore. Where did you meet him? At the cabin near Eagles Peak. I'd rented it for the weekend, told Trevor we needed privacy to work out the details. Garrett's voice dropped to barely audible. I brought drinks to celebrate our solution, but I'd put something in Trevor's glass to make him more agreeable to negotiation. Rohypnol. I just wanted him disoriented enough to sign an agreement giving me time to fix the books. But Trevor realized something was wrong and tried to leave. Garrett was crying now, tears streaming down his face. We fought. He was calling me a thief, threatening to have me arrested. I hit him with a flashlight to stop him from leaving. And then you dragged him to the cliff and pushed him over. He was unconscious. I thought he might already be dead from the head injury. I panicked and decided to make it look like a climbing accident. Garrett's voice broke completely. I moved his body to the remote area, scattered some climbing gear around, tried to make it look like he'd fallen while climbing alone. The recording device had captured every word of his confession. In the distance, I could see police officers moving closer to our location, ready to make the arrest. Trevor trusted you, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. He considered you a friend. I know. I never wanted him dead. I just wanted him to give me time to fix things. But instead of fixing things, you became a murderer. Detective Martinez and his team moved in swiftly, surrounding the picnic table as Garrett sat slumped in defeat. Garrett Hoffman, you're under arrest for the murder of Trevor Blackwood. As they read him his rights and led him away in handcuffs, I felt a complex mixture of relief, satisfaction, and profound sadness. Justice was being served, but Trevor was still gone, and the man who'd killed him had been someone he'd trusted completely. The trial 3 months later was swift and decisive. Garrett's recorded confession, combined with the financial evidence and forensic findings, left no room for reasonable doubt. The jury convicted him of first-degree murder after less than 4 hours of deliberation. During his sentencing hearing, I chose to address the court with a victim impact statement that I'd spent weeks preparing. The safety deposit box key was tucked inside an envelope marked, "For Zoe," in Trevor's handwriting, hidden behind our wedding photo in his desk drawer. I'd found it while cleaning out his office 6 months after Garrett's conviction, long after I thought there were no more secrets left to discover. The key led to a box at First National Bank that I didn't know existed, registered under Trevor's name alone just 2 weeks before his death. When the bank manager opened the metal box, I was unprepared for what I found inside. Documents. Dozens of them, meticulously organized and labeled in Trevor's precise handwriting. Bank statements, email printouts, financial analyses, and legal research, all focused on Garrett's embezzlement. Trevor had been building a comprehensive case against his business partner, gathering evidence that would have sent Garrett to prison for decades. But it was the letter addressed to me that changed everything I thought I understood about Trevor's final months. Zoe, it began, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and I need you to know the truth about everything. My hands shook as I continued reading Trevor's final message, written just days before his death. I know about Garrett's embezzlement, and I know he's becoming desperate as I get closer to exposing him. I also know you've probably discovered my affair with Kylie by now, and I can't express how deeply sorry I am for betraying your trust. The letter went on to explain Trevor's plan to expose Garrett's crimes and face the consequences of his own choices. I was planning to turn in all evidence against Garrett next week, then come home and confess everything to you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness for the affair, but I hoped we could work through it honestly instead of through the deception I'd been living. But it was the next section that completely reframed everything I'd believed about Trevor's intentions. I've prepared divorce papers that give you everything, the house, my share of the legitimate business assets, and most of our savings. I know I hurt you, and I wanted to make sure you were protected financially regardless of what happened to our marriage. The papers are with attorney James Mackenzie downtown. Trevor hadn't been planning to steal from me during the divorce. He'd been planning to give me everything as an attempt to make amends for his betrayal. The affair with Kylie was wrong, but it opened my eyes to how much I'd taken our marriage for granted. I was planning to end things with her and fight for our relationship, if you'd have me. I know trust would take years to rebuild, but I was willing to do whatever it took. The financial documents in the safety deposit box supported his claims. Trevor had been moving money not to hide it from me, but to protect it from potential seizure during Garrett's criminal investigation. Every transfer was documented with notes explaining his intention to preserve our assets while cooperating with law enforcement. I need you to know that despite my mistakes, I never stopped loving you. The climbing trips that started this whole mess began as an escape from guilt about the affair, but they became something more, a way to find clarity about what really mattered to me. On every mountain, I thought about coming home to you and trying to rebuild what I damaged. Tears blurred my vision as I read Trevor's final words. If something happens to me before I can make things right, please know that you deserved better than the husband I was, but you were always the wife I wanted to come home to. I hope someday you can remember the good parts of our marriage without the pain of how it ended. The letter was signed and dated 3 days before his death. The attorney James Mackenzie confirmed everything when I met with him the following week. Trevor had indeed prepared divorce papers that favored me completely, along with a will that left me everything except a modest inheritance for his brother. Trevor was very specific that he wanted to be fair to you, Mackenzie explained. He said he'd made mistakes that hurt you, and he wanted to ensure you were protected regardless of whether you chose to reconcile or divorce. The revelation that Trevor had been planning to confess everything and make amends didn't erase the pain of his affair, but it complicated my grief in ways I hadn't expected. The man who'd betrayed me had also been trying to find his way back to honesty and redemption when Garrett murdered him. Kylie and I had maintained an unlikely friendship built on shared trauma and mutual support during the investigation and trial. When I shared Trevor's letter with her, she cried as hard as I had. He told me he was going to end our relationship, she admitted. The weekend he died, Trevor said he wanted to try rebuilding his marriage with you. I was heartbroken, but I respected his decision. The affair had been real, and the pain it caused was valid. But Trevor's murder had prevented him from taking responsibility for his choices and attempting to make amends. Garrett had stolen more than Trevor's life, he'd stolen Trevor's chance at redemption and our chance at either reconciliation or honest closure. The business license for Blackwood Justice Consulting arrived on a Tuesday morning exactly 1 year after Trevor's death, official confirmation of the new life I'd built from the ashes of tragedy and betrayal. The company name honored Trevor's memory while acknowledging the complex truth about our relationship and his murder. My consulting firm specialized in helping victims of financial fraud and insurance scams, using the investigative skills I'd developed while uncovering the truth about Trevor's death. The irony wasn't lost on me. Trevor's life insurance money, which had felt like blood money for so long, was now funding a business dedicated to helping others seek justice. The first year of healing had been harder than solving Trevor's murder. Grief, anger, betrayal, and love existed simultaneously in my heart, creating an emotional complexity that therapy helped me navigate but never fully resolve. Dr. Sarah Thompson, my counselor, helped me understand that holding contradictory feelings about Trevor was normal and healthy. People aren't simply good or bad, she explained during one of our sessions. Trevor was a loving husband who made terrible choices. He was planning to make amends when he was murdered. Both things can be true simultaneously. Learning to live with that complexity had been essential to my healing. I could mourn the husband I'd loved while acknowledging the affair that hurt me. I could honor his memory while being honest about his flaws. Most importantly, I could build a future that incorporated lessons learned from both his love and his betrayal. My first client was a woman named Janet whose husband had disappeared with their retirement savings, leaving behind forged documents and empty investment accounts. Using techniques I'd learned while investigating Trevor's finances, I helped Janet trace the money through offshore accounts and shell companies, ultimately recovering most of what her husband had stolen. "You understand," Janet said through tears when we successfully froze her husband's hidden assets. "You know what it feels like to discover the person you trusted most was living a lie." That understanding, born from my own experience with betrayal and financial deception, became the foundation of my consulting practice. Clients found comfort in working with someone who'd survived similar trauma and emerged stronger. My experience gave me credibility that academic training alone couldn't provide. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply satisfying. Each successful case felt like justice not just for my clients, but for Trevor and myself. Every recovered asset, every exposed fraud, every conviction secured was a victory against the kind of greed and deception that had destroyed my marriage and ended my husband's life. Kylie and I had developed an unlikely partnership, both professional and personal. Her accounting expertise complemented my investigative skills, and our shared experience with Trevor's betrayal and murder created a bond that transcended the awkwardness of our initial relationship. We're probably the only business partners who met because we were both involved with the same man, Kylie joked during one of our strategy meetings. But maybe that's what makes us so effective at understanding financial deception. Our relationship had evolved from mutual suspicion to grudging cooperation to genuine friendship. We'd both been victims of Trevor's choices, and we'd both been changed by his murder and the pursuit of justice that followed. Building new relationships had been challenging but necessary. Dating felt impossible at first. How could I trust another person after discovering how completely Trevor had deceived me? But Dr. Thompson helped me understand that Trevor's betrayal said more about his character than about my judgment. You trusted someone who was trustworthy for most of your relationship, she pointed out. The fact that he made terrible choices toward the end doesn't invalidate your ability to recognize good character in others. Slowly, carefully, I began opening my heart to the possibility of love again. Not the naive trust I'd given Trevor, but a more mature understanding that love requires both vulnerability and wisdom. My transformation from grieving widow to successful business owner didn't happen overnight, but it felt like a natural evolution of the strength I discovered while investigating Trevor's murder. The woman who'd been devastated by discovering her husband's affair had become someone capable of helping others navigate similar betrayals. The life insurance money that had once felt tainted now funded a business that brought justice to fraud victims across the state. Trevor's death had been tragic and senseless, but the investigation that followed had revealed capabilities I never knew I possessed. The memorial bench overlooking Mill Creek was dedicated on a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years after Trevor's death. The bronze plaque I'd commissioned told a complex truth: Trevor Blackwood, beloved husband, flawed human, victim of greed. His life ended too soon, but his story taught us that truth matters more than comfort. The dedication ceremony was small and meaningful. Kylie stood beside me as the park director unveiled the bench, both of us having found a way to honor Trevor's memory while acknowledging the complicated reality of our relationships with him. Detective Martinez attended, along with Dr. Chen and Jake Morrison, the people who'd helped me uncover the truth when it would have been easier to accept comfortable lies. This bench represents something important, I said to the small gathering. It's a reminder that people are complex, that love and betrayal can coexist, and that seeking truth, even when it's painful, is always better than living with beautiful deceptions. My consulting business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I first hung out my shingle. Blackwood Justice Consulting now employed 4 investigators and had successfully resolved over 60 cases of financial fraud, insurance scams, and corporate embezzlement. The work brought meaning to my life in ways I'd never expected. But more than professional success, I'd found personal peace. The woman who'd buried her husband believing he died in a climbing accident had evolved into someone who understood that truth, however complex, was always preferable to comfortable illusions. My relationship with Mark had developed slowly over the past 8 months, built on foundations of honesty and mutual respect that my marriage to Trevor had lacked toward the end. Mark was a prosecutor who understood the complexity of justice and the importance of truth in healing. He'd known about Trevor's affair and murder from the beginning, and our relationship had grown from shared professional interests to genuine emotional connection. I love that you're someone who fights for truth, Mark had told me during one of our early conversations. Trevor's betrayal could have made you cynical about relationships, but instead it made you more committed to honesty. Our relationship wasn't a replacement for what I'd lost with Trevor, it was something entirely new, built on lessons learned from both love and loss. Mark knew he was dating someone who'd been deeply hurt but had chosen healing over bitterness, growth over stagnation. Kylie had found her own path to healing through a career change that took her away from the corporate world where she'd met Trevor. She now worked for a nonprofit organization that helped women recover financially from domestic abuse and financial exploitation. Our friendship had become one of the most valuable relationships in my life, proof that something positive could emerge from even the most painful circumstances. We're probably the only women who became best friends because we were both deceived by the same man, she often joked. But maybe that's exactly why we understand each other so well. The final closure came when I decided to sell the house Trevor and I had shared. Too many memories, both good and bad, lived in those rooms. The proceeds from the sale funded an expansion of my consulting business and allowed me to buy a smaller home that belonged entirely to my new life. As I stood beside Trevor's memorial bench that October morning, watching leaves fall into Mill Creek, I reflected on the journey from that devastating phone call to mountain peak guides to this moment of hard-won peace. Trevor's affair had shattered my trust, but his murder had forged me into someone stronger. Discovering the complex truth about his final months, the betrayal and the attempted redemption, had taught me that people are capable of both cruelty and love, sometimes simultaneously. The life insurance money that had once felt like blood money now funded work that brought justice to fraud victims across 3 states. Trevor's death had been senseless and tragic, but the investigation that followed had revealed capabilities I never knew I possessed and a purpose I never could have imagined. Truth is complicated, I said to the small group gathered around the memorial bench. Trevor loved me and betrayed me. He was planning to make amends when he was murdered. Garrett was his friend and his killer. All of these things are true, and learning to live with that complexity has been the hardest and most important lesson of my life. The bench would remain as a reminder that seeking truth, however painful, leads to healing in ways that comfortable lies never can. That marriage requires honesty to survive. That people are capable of both tremendous love and terrible choices. And that sometimes the worst experiences in our lives teach us who we're truly capable of becoming. As the ceremony concluded and people began to drift away, I remained beside the bench for a few quiet moments. The woman who'd trusted blindly had become someone who loved with eyes wide open. The wife who'd avoided difficult conversations had become someone who insisted on painful honesty. The person who'd been devastated by betrayal had become someone who helped others survive similar wounds. Trevor's story ended on a mountain cliff, but mine continued in a courthouse, a consulting office, and a new relationship built on the kind of truth that makes real love possible. Share your own stories of surviving betrayal and finding strength in truth. Sometimes the most painful discoveries lead to the most meaningful transformations, and there's power in knowing you're not alone in that journey.